When we're looking at measurement, there's a number of steps that you need to go through in terms of developing the whole measurement concept amongst children. Initially, one of the hardest things to differentiate for children is the actual identifying the attribute. It may seem easy for us as adults because we've already identified it. But if you think about the experiences of children up to this point, we've been asking them to group things by colour or by shape or all sorts of things. When we give them a collection of objects, if we're looking for the length attribute, what we're doing now is something very different. So what we need to do is give them plenty of experiences whereby they can extract the particular attribute from the collection of objects they're looking for. So if there's a group of pencils there, they might look at the redness of the pencil, the texture of the pencil, and also the length of the pencil. So initially, what we have to do is reduce the amount of variation within a group so that the particular attribute that we're looking for becomes apparent to the student. So what we need to do, so initially you might want to have a collection of pencils. All attributes will be the same except the attribute of length. So it would be a collection of the same type of pencil, not a set of coloured pencils where colour is also an attribute that we don't want to confuse the children with. So initially what we would be doing is getting a collection. Generally we start with 2 and increase it in terms of the number, and get the child to see the difference in that attribute. For example, the big brother and the little sister, those types of things. What we need to do in this process is really draw attention to the language of the attribute that we're looking at. Often young children will say, my big brother. Now, does my big brother mean he's taller? Or does it mean he's older? Does it mean he's heavier? Those sorts of things. So there's a lot of attributes. So we need to really focus on the language of that attribute. Tall, long, short, small. Small's not the right word. But those words that really describe the length attribute or the volume or the area, depending on what we were looking at. Once the students have then identified the attribute of length, now they're in a position where they can start to compare and order. Now these are 2 separate steps. The comparing simply means comparing one object with another, which is longer, which is shorter if we were looking at length. Once they're able to do the comparison, then we start to bring in a 3rd pencil, a 4th pencil, a 5th pencil, and then they start to order. And that process of ordering by the attribute means there's often smaller comparisons that are being made so that they can start to order those words. We're also in that process talking about the language, the comparative language. This one's tall, this one's taller, this one is the tallest. Those sorts of words are really important in that process. When we're teaching comparing and ordering, what we will do is we'll start with the 2 objects, we'll bring in a 3rd object, and they will then have to sort them, progressively building up to more and more objects. Once the students have been able to compare and order, what we then want to do is introduce the use of non-standard units. Up until now, all of the work that they've been doing with the attribute, and I'll give the example of length, has been by direct comparison. With the use of non-standard units, what we're going to do is create a problematic situation where the children won't be able to do direct comparisons. For example, which is taller, the table or the door? It's unlikely that the children are going to get the table and put it up against the door. In fact, we wouldn't encourage that. So we're creating a situation where they've got to have an indirect measure. Now that would be using informal units, and these could be, depending on the object that they're measuring, they could be books that are in the classroom, they might be paper clips, they may be any tool that you could use to create that measurement. They will then, for example, measure how many books long the table is, and then how many books tall the door is. It's also important in this process that the children start to record their responses. So they might record that the table is 6 books long and the door is 7 books long, or high. Then they know that the door is actually taller than the table. So the intermediary device, such as the books or the blocks or the pencil, the paper clips or the pencils, whatever they've used, tells them how long that is. Once they've got that process of using non-standard units, again we create a problematic situation. So again we're coming back to this problem-solving method of teaching mathematics. So now what we need to do is create the need for the use of standard units of measure. Now that could be, we create a situation where all the tables in the classroom are the same size. They may be rectangular tables, and we ask them in groups to say, well, how big's your table around the edge of the table? Basically they're measuring perimeter. Some groups might have pencil clips, others may have pencils, other groups may have something else. Then you might get the kids to come up and create a table on the board where they record their results. Now, what that means is those who have measured paper clips are actually going to have a larger number in their cell in the table than those who have measured books. The reality is then, as a teacher, you pose the problem, how can that be so? Aren't these tables all the same size? How come we've got different numbers here? Does this mean that the number with the group with the bigger number have a bigger table? Those sorts of questions are posed. And then that creates the need for a standard unit. So initially that might be we all measure with paper clips or we all measure with books. So we can do comparisons between our books. So there becomes a standard unit of measure. Once they've got a standard informal unit, what we then do is start to introduce the notion of formal units of measures such as metres and centimetres, those more formal units. In the early years, this is probably going beyond where we need to be, but you need to understand this process so that you know where to take the children afterwards. What we then have, after this they know about standard units of measure, we then use that to apply and in the context of problem solving. One of the things that's really important in these last two stages is recognising the most appropriate unit of measure for what they're measuring. Would you be measuring a book in metres or would you measure it in centimetres? That sort of problem posing is really important for the students to do. Once they know their units of measure, you might then take them outside to find out the perimeter of the basketball court as opposed to something else, and using different tools for that, whether that's metre rulers or trundle wheels and so on. So the whole process, regardless of the attribute that you're using, really is getting the students to identify the attribute in the first place, comparing and ordering, which then prepares them for non-standard units. After they're recognising the need that we need non-standard units, we then bring in the notion of standard units. Once they're very familiar with the standard units that we use of measure, we then start applying that and using a problem-solving context.